Do I need to tell you? You're live. Sorry, you're live.
It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. And Stompy feels.
I hate everything. Oh wait, is the lyrics supposed to be fine? Well, so here's the thing: is we were going to get copyright infringement, and then you decided to change the lyrics. So good for you. But I do hate everything right now. I have to work. I don't get these quarantines. I have to go brave the world.
Braving the world to save the rest of us. Stompy, selfless hero.
Yeah, that's me. Not really. I'm just trying to suck up to my bosses so I get a raise.
There you go. There you go. Or the great American, hero, American dream chasing hero. There we go.
Yep, there you go. The quote unquote American dream that we are now we're now experiencing.
Oh yeah. This is late stage capitalism, late stage American dream happening right now. Everybody's loving it, except for 99% of Americans. But we're not going to get into that. It's not a politics show, unfortunately. That's going to be the next podcast that myself and Stompy launch. But welcome to the shop. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Dynasty Diagnostic, ladies and gentlemen. As you can tell by the patchiness of my beard, I have not left this house in quite a long time. I don't plan to. Everybody's kind of locking in place due to the coronavirus issue kind of going around. I'm in California. We just recently had a statewide lockdown. So it has been just a really, really, really interesting couple of days. But for that reason, we wanted to at least take some time to go ahead and shift what everybody's talking about, shift the narrative a little bit, talk about something that we very much enjoy in this football game that we all treasure and we all love. There has been quite a bit of movement in the National Football League. Obviously, free agency just opened up not too long ago. We're going to get into that in just a moment. But before we do that, this is, at its core, at its essence, a show about dynasty leagues. And so we generally like to start with something that pertains to dynasty leagues outside of even just the football players that are even involved in that league. So we're just going to talk about a couple of practical and actionable tips that you can go ahead and kind of, stick in the back of your brain, just kind of have a note to refer to every now and then when you're actually making trades in your leagues. One of these actionable tips for me is something that I think a lot of people kind of maybe do, but don't necessarily have a plan for, don't necessarily mean to when they actually do it. Basic economics is supply and demand. If you're the business, if you're the company that can drastically increase supply or drastically limit supply, you set the prices. You, at that point, basically control the market because you can decide what a certain item is worth. You can do the same thing in dynasty leagues. One thing that I like to do when I build my dynasty teams is focus on a position group or two. Generally, as you know, if you've been listening to this podcast, I focus on wide receivers just because they have a longer shelf life for me. But what you do is once you've identified the position group that you want to be strong at, get stupid strong. Get 2 or 3 more starters than you even need, than you can even possibly field on a day-to-day basis. And then at that point, you create your own scarcity. Again, I do it with wide receivers. So I generally carry 6 to 7 wide receivers on a start 4 wide receiver team for the purpose of being able to offer everybody in the league something that nobody else can. Again, you can do this with wide receivers. You can do this with running backs. You can do this with picks. You can do this with any position. But if you're doing that, you're giving yourself the ability to then set the market if somebody else is looking to drastically revamp their wide receiver room or their running back room, so on and so forth. That makes it so that people almost need to deal with you if they want to get better at that position group because nobody else is going to be able to give them 2 or 3 pieces in the same group in the same way that you are. Also, because you have so many pieces at that particular position group, you can absorb losses quite easily because you still have the starters needed to go ahead and still be a competitive team while solving other holes on that roster. So if you're building, a lot of people try to build balanced. I don't necessarily think that that's the way to go, because I think if you're building balance, one thing goes wrong and the whole house of cards starts to fall down. But if you're building a team that is, again, so heavily invested in one or two positions, you're going to be able to trade those for essentially whatever you need at that point. So I wanted to ask you, Stompy, is there kind of a word to the wise that you have for the people that you tend to do on most of your teams that seems to be working out for you?
I think the number one thing that I can tell, I guess, dynasty owners to do in the offseason, to trade in the offseason, is buy depth. You don't need to make a huge trade every time you trade. That just doesn't need to happen. Injuries happen all the time. Guys break out all the time. Guys have disappointing seasons all the time. But if you have depth, then you can ride those bear and bull markets. Oh, let's not talk about stock market. But you can ride those. You can ride those bad times for players. You can ride those injuries by getting depth pieces, and by depth I mean like wide receiver 3, 4, 5, RB 3, 4, 5. I know this season I've been looking at guys like Boston Scott, Justin Jackson, Curtis Samuel, especially after the Teddy Bridgewater signing. But those guys aren't huge names. They're not huge, impactful players in terms of fantasy. But Curtis Samuel could be a wide receiver 36 or a top 36 wide receiver this season. And he could be your wide receiver 4. And if somebody gets injured in those top 2 or 3, then you have a guy that you can stick in and feel okay with. Same with Boston Scott and Justin Jackson. So be looking for those secondary players that may not have a lot of name recognition or impact, but could have an impact on your depth. And then the other one that I really like to do is try to find upcoming free agents, because we've seen time and time again where guys sign to a team and their stock shoots up. But you can try and predict that a year out and look at, okay, well, this guy can get cut. And that just lands the guy that you want to look for in a better position. I mean, for instance, Austin Eckler, I traded Zeke. It was a package centered around Zeke for a package centered around Austin Eckler. Obviously, I got more than just Austin Eckler for Zeke. But knowing that the Chargers weren't going to bring back Melvin Gordon, knowing that Austin Eckler was a restricted free agent and the Chargers could match any contract offer that Eckler got, and how well he did this past season. And look, here we are, his value jumped. And it's not necessarily that you need those guys, but it's, if those values jump, you can sell them for much more than what you paid for them. I guess the best instance of this is Jet McKinnon. And now Jet McKinnon, I don't even know if he's going to play again, but he got a huge, huge jump in value when he signed with the 49ers. But if you had traded for him before he signed, or even at when he was a Viking, like I think it was 2017, right? Before the 2017 season, knowing that he was going to be a free agent in 2018, you would have seen a huge value bump and you could have sold him. So look for those guys. Check out contracts. Look at it. Can a guy get cut, or this guy becomes a free agent? What if he signs somewhere else and jumps in value? Because again, you could get a starter in the future, but you could also see a jump in value and sell that guy off and get a piece that you feel better about.
And then also on the flip side of that, of course, looking at contracts also just lets you know what your level of danger is with the guys that you currently have on your teams. I hope, if anything, this running back carousel that we've seen go on in the last couple of days, the last week or so with the free agency period, has warned people about what could happen to running backs that you might not think were in positions that you should worry about. I mean, Aaron Jones is going to be a free agent next year. A lot of people are heavily investing in Joe Mixon, going to be a free agent next year. There are a lot of people from that class. Well, I mean, obviously, everybody that was drafted in the first round from that class is going to be a free agent. I don't think CMC is going anywhere, but there are a number of people that could be moving teams. Understand that and understand how to leverage that to figure out ways to either capitalize on those price hikes that Stompy was just referring to, or to get out of something just ahead of a potential price drop. So just understand where your team is at. It's more than just, are you a contender? Are you a pretender? Are you going for the championship this year? It's more about actually knowing where these players are in the specific stages of their career and how that impacts your team as a whole when you add that information to everything else that's happening on your team. So just be very, very conscious of the decisions that you're making around players that are set to enter free agency. Now we're going to go into talking about some of the specifics of a free agency that have happened so far this season that could impact your dynasty season. And we have to start with something that I thought was dead, that might just have 1 or 2 more years of relevance. David Johnson. He's now a Houston Texan. Does he live once more? I mean, David Johnson, he had one great year several seasons ago. Since then, he's still been a very good pass-catching back. He hasn't necessarily been the best runner. The Houston Texans last season had 4.13 adjusted line yards. That only ranked 22 in the entire National Football League. That might sound bad, but when you actually compare that to where he was before, Arizona, they had the 21st adjusted line yards. So it's not like the situation is changing drastically outside of maybe David Johnson having more opportunities. Stompy, I wanted to ask you, I mean, if you are a contending team, are you spending the 112 on David Johnson? And if you're not a contending team, is there any reason to grab him right now?
No to a not contending team. Yes to a contending team. I think about 110 is where I'm like, okay. I can't give more than that. But like, he's landing in a spot where Duke Johnson's there, yeah, but Duke Johnson and David Johnson are basically in the same mold. They're not great runners, but they're great pass catchers. David Johnson being likely the better pass catcher. So really, Duke Johnson's probably dead at this point. But then again, with Bill O'Brien, you never know. Maybe he just plays Duke Johnson over David Johnson. But yeah, I mean, he's landed in a good opportunity. It seems like Kiki Kuti is not Bill O'Brien's favorite person. So they need a short yardage type of pass catcher. David Johnson fills that role. And then he fills a role as a runner as well. So I would give it a shot, because the thing is, I don't feel you're wasting a draft pick there, because most of I think the top 4 running backs are likely gone at that point in regular 1 QB leagues. So and probably the top 5. And I don't love picking rookie wide receivers. I never have. We said this last season. Rookie wide receivers just do not pan out in their first season. Those are guys that you should be buying in their second season, because that's when the breakouts start to happen. So yeah, I would be willing to sacrifice a late first for David Johnson. But if you're not contending, there's absolutely no reason to sell him to buy him, unless you can get him for relatively cheap. Let's say a mid-second, and he does something in those first few games, and you can sell him for more in that following season or in that following draft.
Yeah, I mean, that basically goes to everything that we constantly preach on the show. There is no one player fits all for a dynasty team. There is no, you should definitely be buying this guy, you should definitely be selling this guy. It all has to do with where your team is positioned currently and what that means for your specific roster. So when you hear on a lot of these shows, this is a guy I really like, or this is a guy that has a lot of upside, or this is a guy that, has 1 or 2 more years left of usefulness that can be good on the team, understand and contextualize what that means for your specific squad before pulling that trigger. But I think that was a brilliant analysis of kind of how to deal with that David Johnson situation. It all surrounds where your team is at and what this specific piece is going to be on your team. Now, let's talk about the other side of that deal, the more highly publicized side of that deal, obviously. D-Hop, DeAndre Hopkins. Bill O'Brien, you're going to have to explain this to me. DeAndre Hopkins is an Arizona Cardinal. He is Kyler Murray's number one target going into the 2020 season. Christian Kirk is still there. Andy Isabella is still there. Hakeem Butler, who I know my boy Stompy loves, is still there as well. I mean, first let's talk about DeAndre Hopkins, and then we'll worry about what this means for the rest of the people on that team. So talk to me about DeAndre Hopkins as an Arizona Cardinal. Do you think that there has been a value spike or a value dip because of him changing teams, Stompy, or is this just more of the same and everything we should expect from David Johnson last year is the same thing that we should expect from him going into this season and for the foreseeable future?
I think it has to be a drop in value. I've gotten, I wouldn't say in trouble on Twitter of late because of my take about Kyler Murray. He shouldn't be ranked as a top 5 QB right now. But let's look at that offense. I mean, last season they threw the ball 542 times. Kyler was 9th in the league in passing attempts. The top 2 pass catchers got 109 and 108 targets in Larry Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk. Everything was kind of spread out after that. David Johnson had 3rd most at 47. Where do you think the targets are going to come from? Like, does everything just get funneled to DeAndre Hopkins? I don't think that's how this works because they play a lot of 3 wide. They play the most in the league at 4 wide, which doesn't mean a whole lot because it's 18. I think it was like 18% they play 4 wide, but they play the most in the league with 4 wide receivers on the field. And like I said, they play a lot of 3 wide. So there's a lot of pass catchers on the field. Kenyon Drake's a pass catcher as well. And if they they added Dan Arnold, but they added tight end at some point. You're going to be hard pressed for DeAndre Hopkins to meet even like 140 targets. 130 probably is kind of his ceiling, I would guess, but I would project more like 120. So he's not going to get the volume. He's not a downfield guy because he's not a speed guy. And that's something that they already have. They have Christian Kirk and Larry Fitzgerald and Andy Isabella, all kind of short field guys. And if you look at Kyler's stats, he was bottom of the league in terms of yards per attempt. So I just don't know where DeAndre Hopkins fits. And people keep saying, well, how can you say that? He's one of the best wide receivers in the game. Yeah, but he had a ton of volume because he was effectively the only healthy pass catcher for the Houston Texans over the past 4 or 5 years.
Just for some context, last season, DeAndre Hopkins had 150 targets. 150 targets. And he's seen more than that in the last couple of seasons. Yeah. So everything that Stompy's saying, this doesn't mean that DeAndre Hopkins isn't the same player. This just means that, I mean, these are 2 drastically different situations. You mentioned that Arizona had about 18% 4 wide receivers last season. Houston had 1% of their plays were 4 wide last season. So what does that mean? That just means that there is less of a funnel type mentality, as Stompy was alluding to, in Arizona as there was in Houston.
Right. And I mean, if anything, Hopkins does help Kyler Murray by taking away that number 1 corner and opening up Christian Kirk, one of Christian Kirk or Larry Fitzgerald. So that's how he helps this team, I would think. But I can't imagine he's going to get the volume nor the efficiency. He's never been like a super efficient wide receiver. He's a great wide receiver, but he's going to a worse situation in terms of he's not going to get the volume. So he has to drop in my mind.
I will just say that one of the main problems with Baker Mayfield last year, and people like myself, I'm not just going to say people, I will own this, projecting Baker for a huge spike next in the next season, which was last season, the 2019 season. People overlooked the offensive line. People overlooked adjusted sack rate of what was actually going on in the Browns offense. If you look at the Arizona Cardinals, I mean, a lot of the same is still there. Arizona Cardinals ranked 26th last year in adjusted sack rate. Kyler Murray was sacked 50 times. I mean, this is not a situation that they're really spending all that much on. I mean, even if they get a good offensive lineman in the draft, I can't see how they're going to completely turn this around. They have one of the worst, at least passing-wise, offensive lines in the NFL. So I think we're going to see a lot of short targets, just like Snoppy was alluding to. And I think it's going to be a situation where the offense is better as a whole. DeAndre Hopkins is on a better team as a whole, but we don't necessarily see just the same massive amount of volume that we've seen in the past. And that offense might just not function as smoothly as you might think because of the woes and because of the issues that that team still has on the offensive line. All right, so now let's move into, I guess, the main beneficiary of this trade, at least until the draft comes about. And I think even after that, assuming health, which is a big risk here, Will Fuller. Are you back on the Will Fuller train with DeAndre Hopkins out the door? Now it's Will Fuller, Kiki QT, David Johnson, I would assume, are those top three wide receivers or top three receivers.
Don't you forget about Kenny Stills.
Kenny Stills as well. In Houston, I mean, what does this make you think about Will Fuller? What does this make you think about Kenny Stills? Which one of those guys are you going to be more invested in? And do you think that we're going to see a big spike from either one of these guys?
I would rather have Kenny Stills because unless Will Fuller has opted to get his legs cut off and it's legal to have bionic legs put on, I am not touching Will Fuller because he's missed 5, 9, 6. So let's do math. That's 22. He's missed 22 games in 4 seasons. So he's averaged over 5 missed games a season. So he's a great best ball guy because he can explode, but you better not be banking on him playing a whole 16. So, yeah, I'm going to stay away from that. And I think Kenny Stills, if they don't do anything in the draft, which I believe they have to, but they don't have a first-round pick is the funny thing. So Justin Jefferson in the second round, something like that, I don't know if you're really relying on him. So I think it's Kenny Stills and David Johnson at this point.
Yeah, well, I would still go Will Fuller just because I like the boom bust guys a little bit more than most. I do understand everything with injury issues. I just have to pray the fantasy gods that he stays healthy this season. If he does, then I think that is going to be a real area to profit. But I can definitely understand everything you're saying about Kenny Stills and that offense. I mean, what does this do for Deshaun Watson? Obviously, this has to be a big step back for Deshaun, not having DeAndre Hopkins anymore, regardless of what that team does in the draft. You're not going to replace a talent like that. So, I mean, is this a situation where Deshaun Watson, maybe falls out of the top 5 QBs, or is this a situation where, you think he'll be successful regardless?
Funny that you mentioned that. I actually just put out a poll, which I'm trying to find, and I can't. Damn it, idiot.
We're professionals, ladies and gentlemen. We are professionals.
Well, yeah. Anyway, I'm sure I'll search for it. But basically, it came down to a lot of people still think he's top 5. Most people before the trade thought he was top 3. Including me, and some people had him as a top 2. If people don't believe in Lamar Jackson, or they think he's going to regress, but a lot of people have said or voted for he's now in the top 10. So he's dropping, and it makes sense. I mean, you just lost the best pass catcher, arguably the best pass catcher or wide receiver in the game. So, I mean, where else are you going to throw? You have an oft-injured Will Fuller. You have a oft-injured David Johnson at this point. You have Kenny Stills, who was injured last year. You have Darren Fells, Jordan Akins, and Jordan Thomas. Those are your pass catchers, right? Well, and Kiki Kuti, but like Bill O'Brien, we have forgotten Kiki Kuti exists. So it's just a very uninspiring group of pass catchers. And now we're going to find out if Deshaun Watson raised the level of play. If it was a chicken or the egg sort of thing. Was it Deshaun Watson or was it DeAndre Hopkins? I have to say that I would think about dropping them down too. I might be picking like Dak and Russ ahead of Deshaun Watson right now.
Yeah, I'd have to go with that. The same thing that led me to like Baker so much last season and leads me to like Kyler Murray this season is the quality of the pass catching options on that team. If you take away an option like DeAndre Hopkins, by extension, you have to downgrade what that quarterback is going to be this season just because of the lack of pass catching talent. I mean, even with Dak Prescott, look at Dak Prescott before and after Amari Cooper. It's night and day. And I think you see this across the league. People overrate quarterbacks and underrate targets. And I don't think that that's the way to look at this. I think everything is interconnected and you need to kind of approach that as such. And for that reason, I'd be dropping Deshaun Watson. I mean, not too far. I don't think I'd put him in as a top 10. I think he's still a top 7 quarterback. I think I still probably have him as QB6, QB7, maybe even QB5. But you have to drop him from the consensus QB3 that he was not too long ago because of this news.
I actually have the results here. Top 5, 49.7% of people voted. So he's not even top 3. I mean, 8.5 voted for top 3. Top 10, 34.8. So people have definitely dropped him in their ranks.
All right. And then finally, the last, I guess, main asset that's kind of affected by this trade, I'm worried about Christian Kirk, man. I'm really worried about Christian Kirk. I think long-term he'll be fine, but this year, a lot of people were expecting a breakout from Christian Kirk this season. With Larry Fitzgerald in town, with DeAndre Hopkins in town, I'm not sure if we're going to see what people were hoping to see from Christian Kirk. I don't think we're going to see a DJ Moore type breakout from a guy that, again, is going to be battling for targets with all these guys, but also has his position kind of taken in his own offense. Christian Kirk, I mean, by definition, is just a really, really good slot receiver. Now, he can play on the outside as well, and he's done that throughout his NFL career so far, but ideally, he's a slot receiver. So Larry Fitzgerald is going to be playing slot. DeAndre Hopkins is going to be the main target on the outside. I just don't necessarily see where Christian Kirk fits in unless Kyler Murray has an all-world season that people are predicting. If that doesn't happen, I think that we're seeing maybe a top 36 season from Christian Kirk, and that's not what people were thinking just a few months ago. I think top 24 for him is probably at the high end of his range of expectations, and I think that is something that you probably would have got laughed at for saying just a few months ago.
A perfect opportunity to buy Christian Kirk because he's going to take a spot in that offense or a legitimate spot in that offense as soon as Larry Fitzgerald is gone. But best guess, I don't know where Larry Fitzgerald or when Larry Fitzgerald is leaving the league. So,
yeah, I think that's just something to watch. I do think if there's somebody stocked down, he's got to be the guy that's stocked down. But if we're talking about two guys that benefited from one deal that are both bona fide, I think, wide receiver ones, depending on how you feel about a certain quarterback in the league.
Disagree mightily.
We'll talk about this in a moment here, but the Minnesota Vikings sent Stephon Diggs to the Buffalo Bills, opening up massive amounts of targets, I think, for two people, both Stephon Diggs and for Adam Thielen. I think if there was a last hurrah, I think if there was another shot at Adam Thielen being a bona fide top 3, top 5 wide receiver. I think we're going to see it this year. I also personally, I don't take too much away from Stephon Diggs moving from the Minnesota Vikings to the Buffalo Bills. People are acting like the Minnesota Vikings were a really potent high-end passing offense to begin with, and I don't necessarily think that they were. I think being the true number 1 in the Buffalo Bills offense is as good as being the 1A or the 1B in Minnesota. So I don't think all that much has changed. I think if anything, maybe there's a higher ceiling for Stephon Diggs, assuming Josh Allen can hit the broadside of a barn this year. But again, we're comparing Josh Allen to Kirk Cousins, not saying that Kirk Cousins isn't a better passer than Josh Allen. I think he is, but I think that both of those guys are going to see the red zone pretty much the same amount of times this year because of what Josh Allen can do with his feet, because Devin Singletary is probably going to get more of a load this year, and because there's still John Brown on the other side of him. It's not like he's alone in that system. So, I mean, my take on the whole Stephon Diggs situation is if you own him, I wouldn't be selling. I wouldn't necessarily think that there's any cause to worry.
I would.
Adam Thielen, if you are about to go into a championship window and you have 1 or 2 years kind of left on that window, I think he's probably the number 1 buy right now.
I wouldn't say he's a buy because, I mean, I would think that his value has jumped pretty tremendously at this point. Vehemently disagree on Josh Allen because he now goes into a situation whether you like or dislike the change in quarterbacks, literally almost the same situation in terms of passing, in terms of number of attempts. Kirk Cousins had his lowest number of attempts, I believe, of his career as a starter last season. Stephon Diggs had his most efficient season to date last season, which allowed him to get over 1,100 yards, but he only had 94 targets. And he averaged between 10 and 13 yards per reception, up to 18 last season. Now, could that be the case in Buffalo? Sure. Mind you, Minnesota plays in a dome. But now there's 2 outside receivers there. John Brown was, I think, wide receiver 17 last season. And then for some reason, people forget about Cole Beasley. Cole Beasley had more targets than Stephon Diggs last season. And here's the other aspect is, yes, Josh Allen is far worse of a passer than Kirk Cousins. His accuracy is far worse. His deep ball accuracy is far worse. So he ranked 33rd in deep ball accuracy. His true completion percentage was 33rd. His true passer rating was 19th. And here's the other kicker. His receiver target separation ranks seventh in the league. Accuracy rating 35th. Adjusted yards per attempt 23rd. There's nothing there's nothing to like about this situation for Stephon Diggs because I feel like you're competing for targets with John Brown. You're competing for targets with John Brown and Cole Beasley, and they throw just as much as Kirk Cousins did last season. So there's no reason to like this situation.
Are we pigeonholing Stephon Diggs into just a deep ball receiver though? Because I don't think that's
I'm not saying that at all. I never said that.
No, because he said his main competition is John Brown. So if
John Brown's not just a deep ball wide receiver. Why do you think John Brown is just a deep ball wide receiver?
John Brown is mostly a deep ball wide receiver. His ADOT shows that he's mostly a deep ball wide receiver, at least throughout his career, if not just last season.
I think John Brown last season, 14.7 yards per reception, less than Stephon Diggs. Now I would have to
in one season. Look at the rest of their careers. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about
careers. They were pretty similar, except for the 7. I mean, yes, we have to look at yards after catch, yards before catch, whatever. That's fine. I'm not saying that. But the fact remains is in Minnesota, you had Stephon Diggs. Mind you, didn't have Adam Thielen for most of the season. But it's Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen. So you basically had 2 guys. And then Dalvin Cook was in there. Now you have Diggs, John Brown, Cole Beasley. John Brown, Cole Beasley both had more targets than Stephon Diggs. You have Dawson Knox coming in as well. And you have Devin Singletary, who can catch the ball. There's more competition, I personally believe.
Are we forgetting about Kyle Rudolph? Are we forgetting about Irv Smith? Are we forgetting about Dalvin Cook being able to catch the ball? Like,
did you not hear me say Dalvin Cook?
That's the one guy.
I said Dalvin Cook.
But you didn't talk about those tight ends.
What did Irv Smith do last year?
All I'm saying is the composition that you're mentioning.
What did Irv Smith do last year? How many targets do you think Irv Smith had?
I would have to look it up. I don't know if it's
47. How many did
Dawson Knox have? I would say that Kyle Rudolph had over 70. Kyle Rudolph had over 70 targets. 48 targets. Okay, fine. Still, my point is the competition that you're talking about in Buffalo was also present in Minnesota last season. Yes, I will say that Adam Thielen being injured for as long as Adam Thielen was definitely added to that. But I don't see the two situations as wholly different from
they're wholly different because of the quarterback situation. They are wholly different. And they have to play outside.
So what would you say Stephon Diggs is right now? If you had to rank him as a wide receiver, if you're drafting Stephon Diggs, where are you drafting him?
I'm probably not. I'm really not.
Oh, just say you had to. Like, what number wide receiver?
I honestly don't know. I would have to. I don't have the list of wide receivers in my head where I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. I have to look at like ADP and rankings right now, but I think this is a good sell window personally for Stephon Diggs because people are like, oh, he's going in as the wide receiver one, the bona fide wide receiver one. I don't necessarily agree with that.
I would be comfortable with taking Stephon Diggs as my wide receiver 15 and be completely fine with it, thinking that he could, at the end of the year, end up being a wide receiver 12.
Right now, he's wide receiver 18, but I would rather have Keenan Allen, Allen Robinson, Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd. So he might be barely inside the top 24 right now.
We're going to have to agree to disagree on this one and roll back to this one.
But I don't. Hold on. I just don't understand how you think it's a good situation for Stephon Diggs.
I don't think it's a great situation for Stephon Diggs, but I don't think Stephon Diggs was in a great situation last season. I don't think Stephon Diggs has been a great situation for a few seasons while he's been in Minnesota.
Okay,
I think that everything that you mentioned about there being a lot of competition in Bills land, along with having Josh Allen, who's a much less accurate quarterback than Kirk Cousins.
And tucks and runs the ball, by the way.
I would also say, okay, but I mean, Josh Allen is still very early in his career. We don't necessarily know what his career progression is. We don't necessarily know. We don't necessarily know what that offense is going to be this season. They just acquired a true bona fide wide receiver one that can take on QB1s in a way that John Brown couldn't.
I'm just saying, Jameis Winston and if
you're looking at a quarterback that wants to throw the ball down the field, whether or not he's accurate at throwing the ball down the field, if he does it often, a lot more often than Kirk Cousins does, I think that's a net gain. I think altogether, we're seeing a situation for Stephon Diggs that probably is the same when it's all said and done, but I think at least gives him the opportunity at a higher ceiling than the situation that he had in Minnesota. That's the way that I see it, because I just don't think that Minnesota had a great passing offense. I don't think that Minnesota was passing focused, and I think that the Bills might be this year.
23rd in passing yards, 22nd in air yards. Attempted distance was 14th, so we know he throws the ball. But the point is his deep ball completion percentage is 33rd, bottom of the league. 33rd.
What was Winston's deep ball completion percentage throughout his entire career? And then look at what Mike Evans was able to do with his horrible deep ball completion percentage. I think that is completely overrated. I'm looking at volume. I'm not necessarily looking at quality.
He's not getting the volume. He's throwing the ball 450 goddamn times.
Compared to the same 450 times that the Minnesota Vikings threw last season. So what's the big downturn from that?
Far more accurate.
Anyway,
deep ball
again,
completion 17th for Jameis Winston last season.
Yes,
16th in 2018.
Compared to
10 more percentage points above Josh Allen. That's Jameis Winston, by the way.
I honestly, again, if you're going to give me the opportunity, if you're going to give me the opportunity to be the number one, to be the bona fide number one, to not get 10 targets, to not get the 10 targets, 12 targets, 15 targets to Adam Thielen every game in the same way that he was being on the other side of Adam Thielen in Minnesota, I don't think that there's another guy in Buffalo that's going to be able to do that to him. I think volume is going to offset this because you just mentioned he only had 94 targets last season. I don't think they traded a first round pick for 94 targets this season. And I think that they're going to be more pass focused if you're actually going out and trading for somebody that is going to be
the guy
to change your offense.
Now you're making assumptions about what this offense is built around.
I'm making assumptions based on what the team has done. The team is only honest when it actually goes out and spends money and trades and buys people. They went out and got Stephon Diggs. I'm going to think, or I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're going to throw to Stephon Diggs in the system.
Over under Josh Allen attempts 500.
I would say that he probably hits about that, if not a little bit under that. But I think over under Stephon Diggs, 94 targets, I don't think there's any way that we're going to see any less than 94 targets to Stephon Diggs this year.
This is the same situation as DeAndre Hopkins. You have two guys who had over 100 targets last season.
There's no Larry Fitzgerald. There's no.
You have John Brown. Oh, no. You have John Brown and Cole Beasley. John Brown had 115 targets last season.
They drafted 4 wide receivers last year, Stompy. Like, it's just more of a spread. It's so much more of a spread in Arizona than it is in
Cole Beasley had 106, and you somehow think that there's going to be this gigantic leap in passing attempts, and they're going to funnel it to Stephon Diggs.
I never said that. I just think that 94 I just think that 94 is the low end, is the bottom of.
I disagree. I mean, okay, but at the same time, so even if he siphons off target, let's just say he gets 110 targets. How many are going to be completed? And you still probably are looking at 90 and 90 to the other two. So you're not going to get a gigantic jump in targets, and you're getting less accurate. You're getting a less accurate QB.
I think we're going to see at least 20 more targets. I think we're going to see these targets pushed down the field, and even if there's less completed, I think overall, because the targets are going to be pushed more down the field, we're going to see more yards to Stephon Diggs.
I will bet you that he finishes far worse. Maybe I shouldn't say far worse.
I'm willing to take that back.
I wouldn't say far worse. Far worse implies like he's just going to bomb out. But he's going to finish worse next season.
Let's do this. Wide receiver 15 or better. Wide receiver over under. You take the under. I'll take the over. We'll make that.
I'm taking the super under on that.
Okay.
Jesus.
Wide receiver 15.
We're over, I guess.
Whatever. That's the bet.
Okay.
All right. So now let's go on to the other side of that. Adam Thielen. It's now him. We got a couple of tight ends. You have to assume that they're probably going to add another receiver in the draft. I think that this is a situation that's perfect for Adam Thielen. He's a guy that is already going to garner just a massive amount of targets. I would think that every indication is with Stephon Diggs leaving now, that just opens up even more for him. The guys that he's competing with are going to be relatively young. It's going to be probably Irv Smith and whatever rookie they bring in. So I would think that he kind of has the lion's share of targets in that regard. And I just think that this is going to be another situation where he's just peppered with targets so much so to the point that volume gets him to be a top 10 wide receiver this year, barring health.
Yeah, I have nothing else to add there. I mean, he was Cousins' favorite target in 2018. Now he doesn't have Diggs to throw to make happy. So yeah, he can definitely make his comeback into the top 10 this year.
I'd definitely be excited to see that. Now let's talk about some of the running backs moving around and making things a little bit more difficult for us to rate this year. Todd Gurley replaces Devonta Freeman in Atlanta. We also have Melvin Gordon, brand new Denver Bronco. I mean, what is your willingness to be risky enough to go ahead and acquire these guys?
Hold on. So we actually have a patron asking a question in the chat. First question in the chat ever.
Oh, there we go, Alex. What up,
But it pertains to the Viking situation. Is this a Dalvin Cook season? I think it's always going to be a Dalvin Cook season, especially with the way that they shifted their offense last year. Kirk Cousins, again, 444 attempts, which is far and away the lowest that he's had as a starter.
And that offense isn't changing.
No. So, yeah, Dalvin Cook has top 3 talent. He just needs to be healthy. Very easily could be a top 3 running back this season. He just needs to stay healthy.
I would also kind of put into this as well that I just mentioned the people that are about to be free agents or that are coming up into being free agents in the next season. Was Dalvin Cook drafted in the first round? I don't quite remember.
No, he was a second rounder.
If he wasn't drafted in the first round, then this is going to be a situation where he's in the last year of his contract, meaning that the team really has no incentive to do anything but give him all the work that he could possibly handle this year if they have no intention of re-signing him moving into the future. And they already have Madison. And I mean, we'll see if they draft another back, but they already have a few backs in place if they decide to go a different direction. So if there was a singular time to go out and give this guy, again, literally everything he could handle, it would be this season. Thank you for the question, Alex, by the way. All right, Stoppy, you want to move on to the next topic?
Yeah, sorry, we were talking about Gurley, is that right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would sell Gurley right now. I mean, you're probably selling relatively low, but you saw a small spike because he's a starter in Atlanta. But they were not good running the ball last season. They ranked 24th in adjusted line yards. Todd Gurley's just hasn't been the same. I believe he had his lowest yards per carry. Let me look that up real quick. But he's got knee issues, and I would expect them to get a running back in the draft. But, yeah, I mean, 3.8 yards per carry last season. Only had 49 targets. This was in 15 games. So if there's any small, like, spike going on here where you could probably still get a first for Todd Gurley, I would be doing it right now. I know even before the Atlanta signing or before the cut and then the signing, I traded Devin Singletary straight up for Todd Gurley. Or I traded, Todd Gurley straight up for Devin Singletary because I don't think he has it anymore. He's not going to be as effective in Atlanta. He's not probably going to get the volume in Atlanta. And I feel good about Devin Singletary or what I saw from him last year that I feel like I want Devin Singletary over Todd Gurley at this point.
Now, you did mention that Atlanta only had 3.97 adjusted line yards, 24th overall last season. I do think that there is some context to that. Hayden Hurst is a blocking tight end. They got him in the building. They had a lot of injuries at the offensive line last season, but that doesn't mean that I disagree with you. Disagree with the crux of your argument here. I'm still not spending a lot on Todd Gurley right now. I just don't think that, I mean, unless, again, this is your year to win and you need an RB2 to do it and you can get him for the 112 or worse, I just don't think that there's any point because I always have resale value in the back of my mind when you're making any trades, when you're trying to do anything for your team that actually leads you to being able to be flexible in the future. Buying Todd Gurley right now, acquiring Todd Gurley right now, holding on to Todd Gurley right now does not give you any of that flexibility at all. In fact, what it does is it puts an asset on your team that you almost know is going to depreciate faster than a car does when you drive it off the lot. So be very careful about what you do with Todd Gurley. Don't just don't just think, oh, he's going to Atlanta. That's another good location. It's another good offense. He's going to be great. I don't necessarily think that we're going to see that this year. Now, that said, I still do think he's going to be, RB 12 to 15 this year. I do think that he's still probably going to do that on touchdown volume. But you're not going to be able to get out what you put into a Todd Gurley deal right now. All right, so let's now go to the other running back that we talked about, Melvin Gordon. That means that Royce Freeman is no more. And I don't know why you would do something like this to Phillip Lindsay, but you did something like this to Phillip Lindsay. I'm looking at the money touches for the running backs in the Denver backfield. And what I mean by that is touches in the red zone, touches close to the goal line, even catches. I think that this spells disaster for Phillip Lindsay. I don't think that he's going to fall off the face of the earth, but Melvin Gordon can catch. Melvin Gordon, I think, is going to be the guy at the goal line, and Melvin Gordon's going to get the red zone touches. So even if Phillip Lindsay is getting more yards than Melvin Gordon on a game-to-game basis, I think Melvin Gordon is going to be the superior fantasy asset. That said, the presence of both of those guys in the same backfield, I think, takes a lot away from what both of those guys could be. And I'd be hard-pressed to think that any of those guys finish the season anything higher than a mid to low end RB2 at the best, in the best case scenario, assuming that Denver offense functions the way that we assume that it will.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think both Lindsay now is going at the correct value, and he's probably the better value right now because he was going as RB30 in startups, probably drops now. So really, I would be buying Phillip Lindsay at this point because he's still going to get you fantasy points. They're still going to use two running backs. I'm hoping that it's an Eckler type situation. I doubt it because Phillip Lindsay just isn't Austin Eckler in terms of catching the ball.
He was in college. He just hasn't been used as a pass catcher in the NFL.
But I would say that I would try. Well, that's true. I guess I haven't seen it in the NFL. But I would be buying Lindsay right now if you can, because he's kind of in a value valley, if you will. And he's going to put up fantasy points. So he's far away the best value running back for the Broncos. So I would be buying him.
Yeah, I just don't understand why the deal was made. Phillip Lindsay was the more efficient back
on
the ground last year. Phillip Lindsay didn't have any injury issues. I mean, people are always kind of citing his weight as the reason to worry, but I mean, everything we've seen so far hasn't shown any injury issues. Melvin Gordon has been more injured than Phillip Lindsay has in recent years.
But you know exactly why he was signed. Freeman was mediocre.
It's because Freeman's mediocre, but I think that Phillip Lindsay could still carry that 1A role. I think Freeman could still be a good 1B. I just don't know why he's spending the money.
Absolutely not. Freeman was terrible last season. I mean, it makes sense because Elway sees a window, and if you have two legitimate running backs with a second-year quarterback where you don't have to necessarily rely on Drew Lock to win you games, you can run the ball. You basically need Drew Lock not to make mistakes, make good throws, but not rely on his arm game in, game out. So if you run the ball and you build that defense like they have, this is how they plan to win. And so when you have two legitimate scary running backs back there, it helps Drew Lock progress as a quarterback.
Is Melvin Gordon still scary, though? That's
absolutely.
I think Melvin Gordon's still a good running back. Whether or not Melvin Gordon is really that much better than league average, I'm not so sure. And the reason that I say that is because, I mean, the stats kind of bear it out. Like Melvin Gordon last season, he had 612 rush yards, 51 per game.
Mind you,
he had 24.7 per game receiving yards. Again, these are per game numbers, so I'm not talking about the games that he wasn't part of this.
That's not the point. Did not have training camp. And time again, we see holdouts struggle in the season that they come back without having training camp. We've seen it time and time again.
I would agree with that. I think struggle is different from being 50th in the league in yards created per carry. Like that's there at some point, I mean, he had 4 or 5 games to kind of get his body ready to where it needs to be. And we still just didn't see any level of efficiency. The only reason he was able to put up any numbers last season was because the Chargers force-fed him and force-fed him at the goal line. So, I mean, if we're going to use him that way, great. But I don't think that if the point of bringing him in was to have a guy who could be a bruiser at the goal line, I think Royce Freeman can be a bruiser at the goal line. But, I mean, that's neither here nor there.
He's not that big, though.
Royce Freeman, I think, is as big as Melvin Gordon, if not bigger, right?
And yet, Melvin Gordon has proven to be the far better running back and can catch passes.
Again, we shall see. I don't hate the deal. I'm not of the opinion that, Broncos overspends or anything, because I think the Broncos are in a great cap situation. In fact, Snoppy and I were talking about this off camera a couple of days ago. But I didn't see the need here.
There wasn't. I don't think there was a need, but
it's a decent signing.
Yes.
All right. So now you talked about quarterbacks. You talked about Drew Lock. He's going to be one of the new guys on the block that we're seeing this next year, but there has been a bit of a QB carousel going on. Philip Rivers obviously is an Indianapolis Colt. Tom Brady is a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. I'm pretty sure that a couple quarterbacks just lost their jobs or will be shortly. The quarterbacks I'm referring to are both Mitchell Trubisky and Derek Carr. What's happening? What are we supposed to take from all of these quarterback moves? Is there one that you see as a clear upgrade, other than obviously not having Mitch Trubisky starting?
I don't know if I agree with that at all. But Nick Foles, beyond one season, actually really 2 seasons with the Eagles throughout his career, has not been a good passer.
Nick Foles can throw the ball straight, and honestly, as people that understand Chicago fans, I feel like that's an improvement.
Where you have been. Completion percentages don't bear that out.
But when you compare that to Mitchell, I'm not talking about him as a quarterback.
I am comparing them to Trubisky. They are not that much different.
Okay, so let me look this up. What is Trubisky's? Let's see. All right, so how am I not getting this? Here we go. Okay, so last season, Mitch Trubisky, 38 yards, 209.2 a game, 19 completed air yards, 3.5 per attempt, was only 15th in pass attempt distance, 26th in money throws, 7th in interceptable passes. I feel like the only good thing about Mitchell Trubisky has been his ability to run. He wasn't even a running quarterback that much last year.
Let's look at their rate, their number, their career numbers. Jesus. Nick Foles, 62% completion percentage. Trubisky, 63.4%. Average yards per attempt, yes, Nick Foles has a little bit more yards per attempt, a little bit more, 7 to 6.7, 6.92 to 6.41. But it's neither are good passers, so it's
none of these guys are good quarterbacks.
It's not to me. It's not a clear upgrade. Like everybody's like, oh, it's Nick Foles, but Nick Foles really is not that good of a passer.
I just think that,
you have a blind hatred of Mitchell Trubisky. So anything I
know that he has negative 1.7 completion percentage over expectation. And I know that 2 years ago he had negative 5.7 completion percentage over expectation. I know that he's had an ADOT. I know that he's had an ADOT of 9 or lower, 8 last year, 8.9 the year before that, and 7.8 the year before that, which is pretty much Derek Carr levels his entire career. At least I can cite that Nick Foles is slightly better than those numbers. Not, again, that he's great, but he's slightly better than those numbers. Nick Foles isn't a great quarterback, but, I think put in a room, it's not hard to see the difference.
Now tell me what those CPOEs were, because you are saying this without knowing the actual
numbers. In 2018, Nick Foles had a CPOE of 5.2 over expectation. 2019, that is 0.7 over expectation. His ADOT throughout his entire career, he actually had 2 years of over 9. Of his entire career, he's only had an ADOT That has been 8 or lower 3 times, and that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 seasons. Of course, a lot of these seasons with Nick Foles, this is like half the games as a starter, in as a backup sometimes here and there. But I mean, there's like a marked improvement going from that to what we've had from Trubisky over the last couple of seasons.
I think you're using words that are just like a market improvement. I don't know if I agree with that. A small improvement, sure, okay, but that doesn't mean shit because he still is not a good quarterback.
65% completion percentage versus. Anyway, again, just like Diggs, I think we're just going to have to agree to disagree here because I think at the end of the day.
All right, fine. Whatever.
I think at the end of the day that, look.
Do you really think he's going to make an impact for anybody on that team?
I think he is the best quarterback that Allen Robinson has ever played for. I honestly believe that. I fully believe that.
But that didn't answer my question. Do you think he's really going to make an impact for Allen Robinson or Anthony Miller or apparently Jimmy Graham?
I think we can see better numbers from Allen Robinson this year.
Right.
I do. I really do think that we can see better numbers from Allen Robinson this year. But we'll go into our next point here. I mean, we have to. Let's talk about Tom Brady. Let's talk about Teddy Bridgewater. Let's talk about Phillip Rivers. We'll talk with Brady being a Buccaneer. A lot of people are really excited about this. A lot of people are pegging the Buccaneers as title contenders with this. I really don't see Tom Brady as all that different from Jameis Winston if you take out the interceptions. Now, obviously, that's a huge thing when talking about football, but I don't think that there is a huge improvement here because we've seen Brady decline in the last couple of seasons, at least in terms of raw stats and in terms of even average yards per attempt. I just think that a lot of people are thinking that this is a downgrade for both receivers. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think Chris Godwin probably, I mean, if he doesn't see an uptick, it's the same thing that he's had. I think that this is probably a little bit of a downgrade for Mike Evans just because I don't necessarily think that Brady has the deep arm strength to work with Evans in the same way that Jameis Winston could have. But I don't think that this makes the Bucs an instant title contender. I think that this maybe makes them maybe slightly better in the same way that I think the Bears are slightly better this year with Nick Foles.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about QB history, Brady or Godwin is going to get an uptick. I mean, mind you, Godwin did not have a lot of targets last year. Even though he was the wide receiver too, he's just extremely efficient. He had 121 targets, which not bad, but like when you think about those top 3 to 5 wide receivers, you're thinking 140 plus, 150 plus, and Godwin just didn't have that. So I think that volume wise, I think Godwin sees an uptick, and you're very much right. Honestly, I would be selling Mike Evans at this point because I think a lot of people will say name recognition. Tom Brady had Randy Moss back in the day, and they did great. And now Tom Brady is Mike Evans. I would be selling Evans at this point. I think his value drops here because Brady completed had the lowest completion percentage since 2013 last season. He had his lowest yards per game since 2010. His touchdown percentage dropped. His yards per attempt dropped near 10 points from 2018 to 2019. So he's not going to throw the ball deep all that much. Like he will probably throw it deep every once in a while, but I would expect Godwin to be the guy here, and the tight ends. Now that doesn't mean go buy OJ Howard by any stretch of the imagination, because I don't know who's going to actually get the targets there. I have to imagine that they get a running back who's going to be a pass catcher as well. It's not going to be Ronald Jones. So I'm selling Mike Evans right now. And I think Godwin kind of takes a jump possibly into the top 5 after the season.
Now, I agree with the reasons for at least looking at Mike Evans in a different light. because of Brady coming in and the differing skill sets between Brady and Winston, I don't necessarily think that he's a sell, and that's because of his contract situation. He doesn't necessarily have to be a Buccaneer for a long time. In fact, he's probably not going to be a Buccaneer for a long time. If you look at his contract, he signed a brand new contract, I believe, in 2018. His cap hit was $18.258 million to a dead cap of $38 million. Over the last 2 seasons, the dead cap has dropped from 38 to 20 million, and from 20 million to this season, 18 million, which is very similar to what his cap hit is. So essentially, he's zeroed out right now. So he's going to be on the team this season. But moving into next season, his cap hit is $13.8 million. Again, extremely, that's extremely team friendly, which means the possibility of him being traded is something that you really need to look at. But if you look at his dead cap versus that, his cap hit is $13.8 million versus a $4.8 million dead cap. And then it drops to $3.2 million. And then it drops to $1.6 million. Mike Evans is 27 years old. That is the prime of a wide receiver's career. Ages 27 to 29, 30 are the prime of a wide receiver's career. And he has extremely team-friendly cap figure for the remainder of his deal with barely any dead cap on the Tampa Bay side. So there are a lot of things that can happen that make Mike Evans not a Buccaneer, not necessarily with Brady for all that long. And if he ends up on another team with a quarterback who has an arm that, again, plays to his strengths, then I think that there's a lot that you can see from Mike Evans. But if you're looking at it solely for this year, I guess from a redraft perspective, then yes, I can see where you're coming from.
Yeah, but what if if he has a down year and you sold him relatively high before the season, and then you can buy him for lower next season?
Well, you're assuming he has a down year. It's always possible.
I know. I'm not assuming that he's going to have a down year.
Anybody can have a down year. I think that a down year for Mike Evans might still be 1,008 and everything that you want anyway.
I honestly think he is not going to get 1,000 yards for the first time in his career.
We shall see. But at least keep that in mind when making your Mike Evans deals. A lot of things can change. I don't think we've seen wide receivers the caliber of DeAndre Hopkins and Stephon Diggs really move as frequently as we've seen them move in the last couple of years. They're even saying that Julio Jones, or at least that the Philadelphia Eagles are in talks with the Atlanta Falcons to acquire Julio Jones. I doubt that happens, but I mean, if there is a will, there's a way. And with Mike Evans, there's definitely a way when you look at that contract over the next couple of seasons, because it was so heavily front-loaded by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when they gave him that deal originally. Teddy Bridgewater, Philip Rivers, brand new pieces and brand new places. Now, somebody needs to explain this to me. I don't see the difference between Jameis Winston and Philip Rivers. I don't. I just do not see the difference. I see
Jacoby Brissett and Philip Rivers.
No. Between Jameis Winston and Philip Rivers. Because I see both of these guys as guys that throw a lot of interceptions, have a lot of turnovers, are still pretty decent for their teams because they still find a way to score points and put up points at a pretty nice rate. But I don't see why you would sign one before the other. So what is really the issue here, I guess, now going into, if you already have Jacoby Brissett, why are you signing Philip Rivers, who's only a 1 to 2 year stopgap, versus a guy who could probably take your team a little bit more long term?
I will give you that the signing makes no sense because you're not in a win now window. Why are you giving Philip Rivers 1 year unless you're just counting it as a bridge? But why not just stick with Jacoby Brissett at that point? You don't have the pass catchers to win now. You have a great running game. Your defense is fine, but it doesn't make any sense for where that team is at. I agree. Winston wouldn't have made sense to me either. Winston really only makes sense to me in like 2 places, and it was Tampa or it was Las Vegas. I don't know where Winston's going to go. Like, that's kind of the scary thing right now for Winston owners. It's like, where is Winston going to go where he is going to play? I've heard him linked to Pittsburgh, but Ben is coming back and likely probably for another 2 years. So what's Winston going to do there? Winston looks like he's going to be a backup at this point, which I guess makes sense in terms of the NFL. because he's just not he would be the best backup in the league, but he's a guy who
Teddy Bridgewater straight up over Winston. Like you would take again Phillip Rivers straight up. Like I think that there is some
no. I'm saying landing spots right now. I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he is a backup. Like if we survey the entire NFL and look at all of the starting QBs, Winston would be a starting QB. But looking at landing spots currently, because like Carolina signed Teddy Bridgewater, even Cam Newton's out there, and I'm sure people are going to, or some team is going to take Cam Newton over Jameis Winston. Where does Winston start? Winston is going to be a backup this year, which sucks for fantasy owners. I mean, he's a top 3 fantasy QB really, in terms of fantasy production, not actual, because like things like this happen where it's like, well, I mean, he's like kind of a mediocre quarterback just in terms of, can we win with him? Probably not, because he makes really stupid decisions.
Yeah, turnovers, quickest way to do a bench spot, but I did not see this coming because again, versus Teddy Bridgewater, versus Phillip Rivers, versus Cam Newton, if Cam Newton isn't healthy, I'm taking Jameis Winston pretty much every one of those, but I mean, I'm not an NFL GM. I'm not an NFL.
Yeah, that's the other fact. Is like we love him as a fantasy asset,
exactly,
because he creates points. But when you're a GM or a coach and you're like, oh my God, he's going to turn the goddamn ball over again, those guys are viewing it in the lens of, can we win with this guy? And I think a lot of teams are like, no, because he makes boneheaded mistakes week in, week out. And we can't have that.
Can the Carolina Panthers win with Teddy Bridgewater?
I mean, they won with Cam, but Teddy Bridgewater doesn't have the legs of Cam. He's probably a better passer. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I feel good for the fantasy assets there. DJ Moore's fine, obviously. Christian McCaffrey's fine, obviously. They're going to get their targets. They're going to get their production.
I would see a bump for CMC.
Huh?
If they can get in the red zone, that's the main thing. I would see even a bump for a guy like
CMC. Right. I mean, Teddy Bridgewater doesn't have a high ADOT, so those two are going to get it. The underrated move here. It's an underrated move for Chris or oh my God, Curtis Samuel. I just had a stroke mid-sentence. And a lot. I apparently this offseason, I am saying things that people do not like because I said buy Curtis Samuel after that Teddy Bridgewater news because he's getting an accurate quarterback. And I did.
And that's not right. That's not correct. In fact,
but that's not who he is. If you look at his college tape, that's not who he is. He's better in the slot. He's better with the ball in his hands. He's much more like a running back with the ball in his hands. So he's misused especially last season. And the mistake I made was citing air yards. But the point was he was getting his targets. He was getting the air yards. They just weren't completing them. And Teddy Bridgewater is a more accurate quarterback. Now, he may not throw the ball deep as much, but he will get the ball to Curtis Samuel more often because of his accuracy. And that's why I like Teddy, and that's why I like Curtis Samuel, especially at value, because right now he's being taken as a wide receiver 4. Very easily could be a wide receiver 3+ in this with Teddy Bridgewater there. And if he's used correctly. And I expect Rule to use all of those weapons correctly.
Over his entire career, Teddy Bridgewater has never had an ADOT higher than 8. In fact, 8 was his highest ADOT. We've seen 7.2, 6.1. Last season, it was 6.2. I mean, everything that Sam is saying about this guy throwing the ball closer to the line of scrimmage is everything we should be taking away from this. The short targets, DJ Moore in the slot, if you use Curtis Samuel correctly, Christian McCaffrey, we're going to see just an insane number of targets to these guys because of what Teddy Bridgewater can do with the football. So I think that this is still a very, very ripe situation for a lot of fantasy goodness if you happen to play this smartly with the assets out in Carolina. If we now move, back to the Colts, I mean, is there any hope for T.Y. Hilton? Like, what are you even getting here for him right now if you're selling him? Your guy, Jack Doyle, still there, still exists. What is your expectation for him? Is this just an offense where you're kind of staying away from the passing weapons of that offense, maybe just focusing on Marlon Mack, assuming that he's not usurped in the draft? Or is this kind of just an offense that we're staying away from as a whole?
Jack Doyle's going to be a tight end one this season.
Yeah,
people keep saying Mo Alley Cox. I'm like, get out of here with Mo Alley Cox. I mean, he might get touchdowns, but Jack Doyle's going to get targets here. T.Y. Hilton, he's what, 32 now?
Going into his age 32 season, yeah.
Kind of old. Had looked old at times. Has missed 8 games in the past 2 seasons. His yards per reception dipped mightily last season, which probably a lot to do with Jacoby Brissett. Could make a bounce back. I mean, I would have to look, but I believe T.Y. Hilton plays a significant amount of snaps in the slot these days, but I can't be sure of that. Let me check that real quick. Check myself before I wreck myself. I was wrong. He only played 18% of his snap. Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm not loving T.Y. Hilton now. 16% in the slot in 2018, 18 in 2019. I mean, if he's injured and he's going to be an outside wide receiver with Phillip Rivers at deep accuracy is horrendous at this point in his career. I would rather have Paris Campbell, to be honest. Now, everybody will get up in an uproar. I'm like, I'm not valuing those two the same. I am saying I think Paris Campbell, and I said this has been kind of one of my guys that I'm buying. I think Paris Campbell is in for a huge, well, obviously because he was injured last season, but he could be a dark horse breakout candidate this season.
If he plays, Maurice Fountain,
huh?
No love for Fountain.
Who? Because where has that guy been ever?
Injured. He's healthy now, though.
Okay, well, is he? So he's injured for his first 2 seasons?
Wasn't Paris Campbell injured all last season?
I said first 2 seasons. That was 1 season.
Okay.
So, and Paris Campbell played 39% of his snaps from the slot last season in his minimal snaps. But the reason I bring these slot snaps up is Keenan Allen played a significant portion of his snaps from the slot. We know how much Phillip Rivers targeted Keenan Allen. So really, the two that I would be owning because of their values currently, Jack Doyle, Paris Campbell. I don't like T.Y. Hilton's value because I just don't. I don't think that the way his game translates to Phillip Rivers. But really, it's probably you want Marlon Mack, you want Nyheim Hines, you want Jack Doyle, you want Paris Campbell because of their values.
Do you want Mike Williams? Do you want Keenan Allen with Ty God, the quarterback this year, and a potential Tua Tagovailoa or whoever they draft at quarterback in the future?
I don't know because Tyrod's got a pretty deep ball. I've never liked Mike Williams. So he's got a pretty deep ball, and I would expect them to run the ball more and do short passes. But Tyrod's never really used a slot receiver either. But because it's Keenan Allen, I would expect him to start to use the slot receiver a lot more. I mean, yes to Keenan Allen, but really not my favorite value either. Really, I think your best bet here is Austin Eckler and Hunter Henry at this point. I do not like the 2 wide receivers in LA right now.
I would have to completely agree with that. I would have to say, if there is one to kind of value over the other, I would just say, I mean, if we're just looking at roles and what Tyrod's done in the past, then it has to be Mike Williams. But Keenan Allen is clearly the most talented receiver on that team. I just think this is a downgrade for both of them, most likely. But that will be the end of this week's 55-point inspection. We're now going to be moving on to this week's Dynasty Diagnostic that I'm hoping was updated here. Let me take a look at it here.
Yes, it was.
All right. So we are going to go ahead and go over this week's Dynasty Diagnostic. Ladies and gentlemen out there listening, if you want to be the next person to get your team analyzed, go ahead and send it to us at Dino Diagnostic on Twitter. Our episode 60 roster was submitted by Kevin Millhouse. You can find him on Twitter at MillhouseBC. Super cool guy. Be sure to give him a follow. If you want to be part of next week's show, like I was saying before, go ahead and follow the podcast at Dino Diagnostic on Twitter. Leave us a review at the link in the descriptions on iTunes and or Podbean. Our roster this week is a 12-team point per reception.
By the way, before we get into this roster, I just have to say something. This is far and away my favorite roster that we've ever done on this, and you'll see why. Because we've had rosters, where it was like, God, why did you pick this roster? It's so good. There's nothing that needs to be done. Wait till you get a load of this roster. It's going to be great.
Superflex 2 tight end, best ball. Oh, I love best ball rosters. Don't have to worry about the start sit. Start 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, 2 flex, and 1 super flex. At quarterback, Baker Mayfield, Mitchell Trubisky, backup, Mitchell Trubisky, Taysom Hill, Josh Rosen, and Mason Rudolph. Okay, so at quarterback, we have Baker Mayfield and Baker Mayfield. So in a Superflex league, this is terrifying because you need at least 2 quarterbacks added to this team. I'm looking at your picks right now, 105, 106. Maybe you're going to get Jordan Love with one of those if you're lucky. Or Herbert. If he's still out there at 105, 106, it's a possibility, but you're not going to be getting the Burrows. You're not going to be getting the Tuas here. So that's not necessarily going to turn this around in one fell swoop. With just Baker Mayfield at quarterback, I'm shaking in my boots here. We need to seriously look around and start to add some lower price guys. So a guy like Teddy Bridgewater, who people maybe aren't necessarily overvaluing right now, maybe is a guy I'd go after. Tyrod Taylor, I think, is probably the cheapest starting quarterback you can acquire right now. And if you want to go out and, spend a later pick on Cam, spend a later pick on Jameis, just hoping that somebody gets injured and these guys find some starting time, that's probably the best course of action to go ahead and get this QB room right, at least for the season. And then you can focus on the future with your future draft picks. Is there maybe another way of doing this that you would kind of take to pick this quarterback?
You know what? I almost need to wait until the end here to say anything. I honestly do, because I'll say one thing here. Taysom Hill, honestly, not a bad best ball guy, because you can get those games where he gets like a touchdown and some rushing yards, and you're like, okay, I get the points there. So I like Taysom Hill in terms of best ball here. Other than that, it's a lot of. I'm gonna wait until the end of this for the rest of this. I'm gonna wait to talk about this until the end.
At running back, says the guy who can't operate his microphone correctly. At running back, we have Nick Chubb, Josh Jacobs, Marlon Mack, Justin Jackson, Samuels, Ballage, and Rodney Anderson. So we have Chubb, Jacobs. Both Chubb and Jacobs, for me, do not need to be on this team. Running backs have a very short shelf life. These guys are too good to be on this team. I think you can use these assets to try to build your team elsewhere. I definitely start with Nick Chubb. Josh Jacobs, I think, is going to have a bounce back year. Marlon Mack is a guy I'd keep because I think he's a little bit undervalued, and he still is going to be a good running back this season as long as he's not replaced in the draft. But while I do like this running back room as a whole, I just don't think that this running back room fits this roster. As I was saying before, there's no one size fits all for players. It all depends where the roster as a whole is. And I think that, this is like living in the worst part of town with, I don't know, and already RX-8 just sitting outside that you just bought with all the money that you had. Like, you need to get the house first and then go for the rest of it. Still not saying anything on this one?
No, I'm going to keep going. Seriously.
All right. So at wide receiver, Terry McLaurin, Debo Samuel, McCole Hardman, Anthony Miller, James Washington, Paris Campbell, Justin Watson, Akeem Butler, Deion Kane, Kelvin Harmon, Dylan Mitchell, and Gary Jennings. McLaurin, Debo, Hardman, Miller, Washington, all decent. McLaurin probably going to be within a shout of being a wide receiver 1 this year, assuming that the quarterback issues are at least worked out to the point where it's salvageable. I think McLaurin is probably the one guy that you have that has a shot at least an outside shot at being a wide receiver 1 this year, although I don't think that is necessarily going to happen. Debo Samuel, McCole Hardman, love both of these guys. I wouldn't be counting on anything more than really a top 36 season for both of these guys. Top 24 is definitely a possibility, but again, not something I'd be banking on. Anthony Miller is kind of in that same group. James Washington, I think, was usurped a little bit by Deontay Johnson last year. Juju Smith-Schuster is going to have a better year this year, so I don't know how much you're going to put into James Washington as well, but this is another example of having Chubb, having Jacobs. You can't do that with this team. You need to be selling those assets, breaking them apart to try to fill up other spots on this roster. At tight end, Evan Ingram, Gerald Everett, Ian Thomas, Jacob Hollister, Jordan Leggett. Evan Ingram's great when he's healthy. When he's healthy is the main thing. I think that's another asset that may be a little bit too valuable on this team. Gerald Everett, I think you have one more year to wait on Gerald Everett for Gerald Everett to be a really good asset, because I think Tyler Higbee kind of took over that role at the end of last season. Unless the Rams come out in 2 tight end sets this season, I think Everett's role is going to be somewhat limited. Ian Thomas could potentially have a breakout this year. But again, that's putting a lot on Teddy Bridgewater. We just talked about the other targets that he's going to have to battle with. Jacob Hollister, Jordan Leggett, I don't necessarily know what they're worth. And the picks, you have the 2020, 105, 106, and 112. I think you should be using all those picks because you need the depth on this team. And now I'm going to throw it over to you, Sam. What are you doing to fix this up here?
Oh, I'm going to be real here. This legitimately might be the worst roster we've had on this show. Legitimately might be the worst roster we've had on this show. Because it's built wrong. And your assets are few and far between. It really is not good. First, we already know. I mean, QB, you have Baker, who struggled last season. Trubisky, who is I won't say likely. There's a 50-50 shot he's not the starter.
It's Taysom, like 70-30.
Again, I say blind hatred of Mitchell Trubisky. And you're like, no, and then you
justified hatred. Justified.
Josh Rosen probably not going to be a starter in the NFL. Mason Rudolph just did himself no favors last season. There is nothing to like here. I mean, Baker should bounce back, but you need at least one more QB, and it's not here. So your QB situation's garbage. Running back situation's okay. Where are the pass catchers? This is PPR. Chubb's not the main pass catcher in that offense, even though he had 50 targets last season. Jacobs, what did he have? Under 10, maybe under 20 targets. Mack doesn't catch the ball. Justin Jackson not going to catch the ball with Austin Eckler there. Jalen Samuels, you can make a case, I guess, for, but doubt that he's going to be heavily involved with Big Ben back.
That's assuming competition isn't brought up for James Conner, which might happen all over again this year.
Right. Kalen Ballage, no, get out of here. Rodney Anderson, maybe, but I mean, it's Joe. He has Joe Mixon and what the T Williams, and I just lost his name. The other whatever Cincinnati running back. So while your running back situation is okay, there are no pass catchers, so you're not taking advantage of the PPR side. If this was a standard league, great. I feel great. I do not feel great with this running back. Wide receivers. Think about
the notion that these guys, while great, might be pieces that you need to move to fill up.
No. Let me get to the end. Okay. Literally, I feel the worst roster that we've had on here. No offense to Kevin.
Love you, Kevin.
But seriously, like best ball and Superflex and 2TE, like it needs to be built a specific way, and this team is not built that way. McLaurin, like you said, McLaurin had a great season last season, but not a great QB situation with Dwayne Haskins. Debo, they're probably bringing in another wide receiver, and that's probably going to affect Debo. Hardman, you're still dealing with Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce and Damian Williams. So he's probably the fourth pass catcher on that team at best. Anthony Miller, I really like actually this season. But I mean, when he is arguably your third best wide receiver, like I would want him as my fourth or fifth. And he's just not, I don't think he has the upside with Chicago as a lot of guys. James Washington, like you said, probably wide receiver 3 at this point. I do like Paris Campbell. Everybody else after that, I do like Hakeem Butler, but they just got DeAndre Hopkins, who's basically the same type of wide receiver as Hakeem Butler. So there's nothing that's like stable in terms of wide receivers. There's a lot of upside with these wide receivers, but in terms of stability, like you don't have a bona fide top 12 wide receiver here. And I think you need that. You have a couple potential top 24s, a couple potential top 36s, and that's all I see here. So like nothing great there, nothing that you can hang your hat on.
You're even kind of lucky that this is the best ball, because figuring out who to start week to week with these guys
is
just
awful.
Be absolute hell.
So yeah, I guess that's your saving grace here. It's best ball, so you don't even have to worry about that. And then tight end, Evan Ingram. I mean, fine. I've kind of soured on Evan Ingram of late because he just can't stay healthy. Like you said, Everett is tight end 2 behind Tyler Higbee. In fact, Tyler Higbee is the one that signed an extension before last season, not Gerald Everett. Ian Thomas, we'll see. He doesn't have Cam anymore, or he won't have Cam anymore. He doesn't have Norv Turner. So we don't know what that offense looks like in terms of tight ends under Rule and under Teddy Bridgewater. Jacob Hollister, they just signed Greg Olsen. They still have Will Disley, so he potentially is the tight end 3 on that team. And then Jordan Leggett. I don't really care about Jordan Leggett. There's not 2 guys I feel comfortable starting at tight end here. And then, like, I would feel a lot better if you had earlier picks in 1.05, 1.06. I think you're okay with that. I think you can probably get 2 running backs, honestly, 2 pass catching running backs, but you really need a quarterback, so you probably got to go running back quarterback. And I don't think that makes your team better. And then 1.12, it's going to be a wide receiver, and that's just not great. So what I'm saying is you sell everything. Baker still has a tremendous amount of value. You can probably sell Baker for, let's just say, Sam Darnold plus. And I would do that because Sam Darnold's still extremely young. And even though he has Adam Gase, he can get out of that contract when he's still young and have like kind of a career resurgence after Adam Gase, or Adam Gase gets fired before that contract ends. Drew Lock plus. You could get Drew Lock plus, and I would love that. But Baker's value right now is still a top 10 quarterback. And there's guys that are going later that I would feel comfortable with. I mean, even like Matt Stafford, who's only 32 years old and still has probably a good 3 to 5 years left.
Don't disrespect Matt Stafford by saying even Matt Stafford.
Well, no, I'm saying like there's guys in the teens, right? Going in like the teens among QBs that are just like, why are these guys going so late? Kirk Cousins, Matt Stafford, Matt Ryan. I mean, Matt Ryan's a little bit older, but still, point still stands. So there's still a lot of value at quarterback that you can get for Baker, and then you can get something added on. If somehow you could get Drew Lock plus a first, I don't know if you can do that right now. I would do that in a heartbeat because I feel really good about Drew Lock in his future. I mean, other than that, you probably have to hold Trubisky, Taysom Hill, Rose, and Rudolph because it's just you're not going to get any value out of those guys. You have to sell Chubb, like you have to. He is your in Superflex. Baker might be higher value, but Chubb arguably is your best asset, and you need to sell him to get picks and or a player.
Multiple pieces.
What I would be doing is selling Chubb for like if you can get an early round 2020 pick and then like a young wide receiver who hasn't quite broken out, but you feel good about, I would do that. And maybe more, because Nick Chubb, I believe, is a top 5 running back at this point. Same with Jacobs. You got to sell Jacobs. Basically, when you're rebuilding, buy young wide receivers and wait and pick running backs.
Running backs should be the last additions to your team as well.
So same thing as Chubb. Sell Jacobs for a pick and a young wide receiver. Mac, you could probably still get a 2021 first for, and I'd feel okay with that. And then wide receivers, you got to keep McLaurin, you got to keep Debo, keep Hardman, keep Anthony Miller, keep Paris Campbell. Honestly, I don't think you can do anything with these wide receivers right now because they're young, and I wouldn't be selling anybody. Except for maybe James Washington, but if somebody was high in James Washington after last season. And the same with tight ends. Like, well, would you sell Ingram in a 2 tight end?
On this team, I would. I would have to.
I would, like, if you could get Mike Gesicki and something
exactly
else.
Who I'd be going for. That's exactly what I'd be going for. I'd be going for Gesicki and a low first round pick.
Or what about like TJ? You could get TJ Hawkinson in a first. And I would feel okay about that.
I'd rather have Gesicki than Hawk.
Well, and that's fine. But I mean, the point still stands is there's young tight ends that you could get where you could break Ingram into a young tight end and a first round pick.
Even
or
potentially maybe not Fonten something. I would go Fonten.
Oh my God, I'm gonna kill you. You are a Denver Broncos fan. It is Noah Fant. I'm gonna murder you right in the throat. So I mean, that's where we're at, is like you need to you're not competing for anything here. And I really do legitimately think this might be the worst roster we've had on this show. It's horribly built. God, that feels mean.
Yeah.
It's not. Again, not a criticism of Kevin as a person, but it's
Kevin. I want you to know that I love you. Just know that Aton loves you.
It's not built. It's not built well for this Superflex 2 tight end, and you don't have the best assets in the world. So, you basically have to scrap everything. Anything of decent value. Anything of decent value, you need to get rid of it, except for your young wide receivers.
It all must go. The only reason that we're not even sell the young wide, we're not saying sell the young wide receivers is not because that's probably not something you should be doing. Probably is something you should be doing on this team. You need to sell everybody, but these particular wide receivers that you have on this team have not accrued enough value for you to actually sell at a profit right now. If you're selling, you're probably getting just what they're worth back, and that's not what you need.
Well, and I would say that it's a nice start for a rebuild, right? I mean, with those wide receivers, because you're starting with a very good wide receiver in McLaurin, very good wide receiver in Debo.
In 2 years,
Hardman could step into the wide receiver 2 role in Kansas City. Anthony Miller, though, has had injuries in the past 2 seasons, has put up decent production with Trubisky. So you have a nice start to a rebuild because of those wide receivers. But sell Chubb for a wide receiver, probably a high-end young wide receiver in a first. Same with Jacobs. Mac, get a 2021 first. Baker, get like Drew Lock in a first, and then you look pretty good going into next season.
All right, so my neighbor has a bright pink PT Cruiser that I have never seen move in 20 years of living next to this guy. I drive by his house every day, and I've never seen this car move. It's also a PC Cruiser, which, in my opinion, is probably the worst designed car ever. We need help. We need help here. In fact, the name of this episode should be called Help because of this. I don't think that this is unsalvageable. As Sam was just saying, as Sam alluded to, the wide receivers that you have on this team in a couple of years can be a good wide receiver core. That doesn't mean you don't need to continue to add to it, but there's potential here if you're willing to wait for it. But this is a fire sale team. You need to sell Chubb. You need to sell Jacobs. Again, keep in mind, running back should be the last thing that you add to a dynasty team, or at least very, very close to the late stage of you competing. And we've kind of done that backwards here. So you need to sell those for as much as you can possibly get. Evan Ingram, I think you should be selling him as well because I think you can get a Gasecki. I think you can get a Font. I'm saying that for you, Sampi. I think you can get a Font plus in a sale. I think that this year you need to kind of go in with the goal of bottoming out, getting as high rookie picks as you can next year, and being able to pair those high rookie picks with a bunch of young talent that you were able to acquire from your big sales this year to then be a contender in the 2021-2022 season. That's where I think that you're at with this team, and that's what I think the best course of action is with this team. But, I mean, Baker isn't a bad quarterback to have. You just need to add one or two to him. Your running back group is nice, but I think you need to break it up. But, I mean, if you don't want to, it's nice on its own if you're willing to wait 1 or 2 years. And if you have other avenues for adding to the wide receiver core in this team to make it competitive, your main goal should be this season to improve that wide receiver core and to get at least one quarterback. If you can accomplish both of those things, you're going into next season with a fresh slate with the ability to actually compete once you get, the 1 or 2 running backs in that class that are going to be productive off the bat.
Yeah, this is cash for clunkers. This is the squealing, the fan belt squealing, burning oil, probably missing a rim or has two donuts on it, has like their mirror taped, has a tarp over one of the windows. This is but it has a kicking stereo system in it that just doesn't belong because it rattles the entire car. That's how I feel here. Like, you have some decent pieces. Like Chubb is decent, or Chubb's a great piece. You have those young wide receivers. You have Jacobs and you have Ingram and Baker. But the way this entire thing is put together is just not good. You are not going to compete with this team. So take out the speakers, take out the stereo system, sell those off, crush the rest of the goddamn car, use the money that you get for those speakers to put a down payment on a new car. That's what you need to do.
Hood Maserati. That's what we're calling this. It's the Hood Maserati.
No, anyway. It's not that's disrespectful. It's like the Hood Honda Civic. Like,
I was just saying, like, it didn't belong.
I'm saying that it's so bad that it makes a Honda Civic look good. Like an old 10-year-old Honda Civic look good.
Anyway, that is going to be it for today. We do appreciate you sending in these types of rosters. These are the ones that we really want to get into because these are the ones we can really sink our teeth into when we're doing this. So, Kevin, please understand, we really, really did appreciate it.
It's nothing against you, man. I'm just saying this team's absolute trash. It's that trash fire that's floating down a river type of roster.
Anyway, that is going to be it for today. Please make sure you follow your head technicians. Myself, Eitan Mozia, on Twitter. You can follow Sam at FF Stompy. Please also make sure you go to the Dynasty Diagnostic podcast feed on iTunes. Give us a 5-star rating and review. Really helps the podcast grow and reach more listeners, and we are eternally grateful for that. Sam, you want to talk about the store?
Yeah. So don't forget we have Patreon. So patreon.com/Dino Diagnostic. Only have a few patrons. Thank you guys for supporting us. We try and do live podcasts for you every time we podcast, so you can watch them live with us. We'll answer questions as well. Thanks, Alex, for the first question, I believe, that we've gotten on one of our shows. Also can get shirts, can talk to guys like Dynasty Outhouse, Shane, us two, in a private chat, stuff like that. And it helps support us in the time we put in here. And then go to storeenvy.com and search FF Pod Shirts. It is Dynasty Outhouse's podcast podcast shirt store. They have Trade Addicts. They have Superflex. They have Top Shelf, and then they have us, and they have mugs and stickers and shirts. And you can support us that way as well. And then it's also going to a good cause. 10% goes to Fantasy Cares, Scott Fish's thing. Just forgot. Charity. Good Lord. Scott Fish's charity, which goes to Toys for Tots. So yeah, storeenvy.com, search FF Pod shirts, and help support not only us, but a good cause as well.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you so much. Also, we are starting to go ahead and gather new people for the new rendition of the DDCL. We will be relaunching the league. We'll be adding 12 more people to a league that already contains 36 people going into next year. We just want to have a really, really fun time with that Dynasty League, that listener Dynasty League. So if you want to be part of the league, go ahead and reach out to either Sam or myself. Let us know. We'll go ahead and get you on the list, and we will announce when things are getting started. But thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening. Thank you for making it to the Dynasty Diagnostic Service Center today. Please be sure to keep up with your scheduled maintenance and catch us next time to ensure quality performance. See you on your next visit.